The snowstorm hit without warning, turning the Rocky Mountain Trail into a death trap. Sarah, Mike, and Josh stumbled through knee-deep powder, hypothermia creeping in fast when they spotted the tiny log cabin hidden in the pines. Inside, they expected basic shelter. Instead, they found something impossible. The door wasn't locked, a small mercy that probably saved their lives. Sarah's fingers had gone numb an hour ago, and Josh's lips were turning blue beneath his frost-covered beard. Mike shouldered the heavy wooden door open, and they tumbled inside like refugees from a war zone. "Jesus!" Mike gasped, shaking snow from his jacket. "I thought we were dead out there." The cabin's interior defied expectations. Where Sarah anticipated cobwebs and mouse droppings, she found meticulous organization. Hand-carved shelves lined the walls, filled with books on engineering, botany, and physics. A cast-iron stove radiated blessed warmth, its fire crackling as if someone had just fed it fresh logs. "Hello?" Josh called out, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Anyone home?" Footsteps echoed from a back room, and a young man emerged, tall, lean, with intelligent dark eyes and the kind of confident bearing that seemed odd for someone who couldn't be older than 18. His clothes were practical: wool sweater, sturdy boots, jeans worn soft from use. "You're hypothermic," he said matter-of-factly, studying their condition. "Sit by the stove, don't warm up too fast." He moved with practiced efficiency, pulling wool blankets from a chest and handing Sarah a steaming mug that appeared from nowhere. "Drink this slowly. It's pine needle tea, vitamin C, and warmth." "I'm Sarah," she managed through chattering teeth. "This is Mike and Josh. We got caught in—" "The storm, yes. It came in faster than the weather service predicted." The young man added another log to the fire. "I'm Marcus. You're lucky you found this place." Mike flexed his fingers, trying to restore feeling. "You live here alone?" Marcus nodded. 3 years now." Something in his tone suggested this wasn't a typical wilderness retreat story. The cabin felt too sophisticated, too deliberately arranged. Sarah noticed details that didn't quite fit: LED strips providing subtle lighting, a tablet computer charging on a side table, and what looked like a high-end water filtration system built into the kitchen area. "You're not some back-to-the-land dropout, are you?" Sarah asked. She had good instincts about people. It came with being a journalist. Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his serious features. "MIT, actually. Applied physics and engineering. I was supposed to graduate next month." He shrugged. "Plans change." Josh leaned forward, color returning to his face. "Mit, at your age?" "Child prodigy," Marcus said without pretense. "Started college at 14, full scholarship, research opportunities, the whole package." He moved to the window and peered out at the swirling snow. "This storm's going to last 3 days minimum. You're welcome to stay, but there are rules." The 3 hikers exchanged glances. They weren't exactly in a position to negotiate. "What kind of rules?" Mike asked. Marcus turned back to them. "Don't touch anything without asking. Don't go wandering around at night. And don't mention this place to anyone when you leave." "Why?" Sarah's journalistic instincts were pinging. Instead of answering directly, Marcus walked to what looked like an ordinary section of floor near the kitchen. He knelt and pressed his palm against a seemingly random floorboard. There was a soft click, and a hidden panel slid away, revealing a keypad. "Because this isn't just a cabin," he said, punching in a code. The floor shuddered, and a section began to descend, revealing a staircase leading into a softly lit underground space. Sarah caught glimpses of growing plants, sophisticated equipment, and corridors that extended further than should have been possible. "Holy shit," Josh whispered. Marcus gestured toward the hidden entrance. "Welcome to what I've really been building. But before you go down there, understand something. Knowledge has consequences. Sometimes the price of knowing something is higher than the price of ignorance." Sarah stood, her journalist's curiosity overriding caution. "What is this place?" "Proof of concept," Marcus replied. "For a sustainable underground habitat that could support human life indefinitely. Solar power, hydroponics, water reclamation, air filtration. everything needed for complete self-sufficiency. Mike frowned. Why the secrecy? This technology could help millions of people. Marcus's expression darkened. Because I discovered something while building this, something in the mountain itself, something that certain people don't want discovered. Through the cabin's windows, the storm howled with renewed fury, but inside, the three hikers felt a different kind of chill. They'd stumbled into something far more complex than a wilderness shelter. The question is, Marcus continued, his hand still hovering over the keypad, do you want to see what's down there? Because once you do, there's no going back to not knowing. Sarah looked at her companions, then back at Marcus. Outside, the storm raged. Below, secrets waited. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt unnatural. Sarah pressed her ear against the wooden floor, certain she'd heard something mechanical humming beneath their feet. The cabin's rustic appearance, hand-hewn logs, stone fireplace, oil lamps, seemed almost deliberately quaint now, like a carefully constructed facade. There, she whispered, motioning for Jake and Marcus to join her. Listen. Jake knelt beside her, his weathered face creased with concentration. After 30 seconds, his eyes widened. That's ventilation, industrial grade. Marcus remained skeptical until he placed his palm flat against the boards. A subtle vibration thrummed through the wood, rhythmic and purposeful. What kind of hermit has industrial ventilation under a log cabin? Sarah's fingers traced the edges of the floorboards, searching for irregularities. Near the corner where she'd first noticed the sound, one section felt different. The wood was newer, the grain running perpendicular to the surrounding planks. She pressed down experimentally, and the board shifted slightly. It's a panel, she breathed. Working together, they managed to lift the section, revealing a sophisticated electronic lock embedded in what appeared to be a titanium access hatch. The display glowed blue in the lamplight, showing a numeric keypad and biometric scanner. This is military spec, Jake said, his voice tight with recognition. I've seen similar systems in classified facilities. Marcus stared at the technology, his mind racing. The books upstairs, advanced mathematics, quantum physics, genetic engineering. What if our hermit wasn't just some backwoods philosopher? Sarah examined the lock more closely. The interface was sleek, almost organic in its design. There has to be another way in. People build backup systems, especially paranoid ones. They spent the next hour methodically searching the cabin. Behind a loose stone in the fireplace, Marcus discovered a hidden compartment containing a leather journal. The pages were filled with equations, diagrams, and notes written in a precise hand. Most intriguing were the sketches, complex architectural plans showing multiple underground levels, laboratories, and what appeared to be living quarters. Look at this, Sarah said, pointing to a margin note. Emergency Access Protocol 77 Alpha, manual override in case of system failure or hostile acquisition. Jake studied the accompanying diagram. There should be an external entrance, probably camouflaged, maybe 100 yards from the main structure. The journal's author had annotated the plans extensively, revealing an obsession with self-sufficiency and security. References to the coming collapse, genetic preservation, and rebuilding from zero filled the margins. One passage made Sarah's blood run cold. They will never find what I've built. The future of human evolution rests in absolute secrecy. Following the hand-drawn map, they ventured into the forest behind the cabin. The morning air was crisp, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. Marcus nearly missed the entrance, a section of what looked like natural rock formation that proved to be an expertly crafted facade. Hidden beneath layers of moss and carefully arranged stones was another electronic panel. This one accepted the numeric code from the journal 7734. The false rock face slid aside with barely a whisper, revealing a staircase that descended into blue-lit darkness. The walls were lined with smooth concrete, and the air that wafted up carried the sterile scent of advanced air filtration systems. We should go back, Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. This feels wrong, dangerous. Jake was already moving down the stairs. We're lost in the wilderness with limited supplies. If there's food, water, or communication equipment down there, we need it." Sarah hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. The journal had revealed glimpses of something extraordinary, a hidden world built by someone with resources and knowledge, far beyond what any ordinary hermit should possess. But the paranoid tone of the writing troubled her. What had driven someone to build this elaborate underground sanctuary? The staircase descended for nearly 50 feet before opening into a pristine corridor lined with sealed doors. Emergency lighting cast everything in an ethereal blue glow, and the hum of hidden machinery was constant now, a technological heartbeat beneath the earth. The first room they entered took their breath away. Banks of servers lined the walls, their displays showing streams of data that meant nothing to them but clearly represented massive computational power. Beyond that, they found laboratories equipped with equipment Sarah recognized from her graduate studies: centrifuges, spectrometers, what looked like a complete genetic sequencing setup. "This isn't just a survival bunker," she whispered. "It's a research facility." Jake had moved to a wall-mounted display showing the complex's layout. 7 levels, each dedicated to different functions: power generation, food production, research, manufacturing, and something labeled simply as development. Marcus stared at a sealed chamber filled with row upon row of cylindrical containers, each one glowing with soft internal light. What kind of person builds something like this? And why hide it under a simple mountain cabin? The answer, when it came, would challenge everything they thought they knew about survival, progress, and the price of human evolution. The steel ladder descended into absolute darkness, each rung cold against Maya's palms as she followed Jake down into whatever lay beneath the cabin. Her headlamp carved weak circles in the black void, revealing glimpses of smooth concrete walls and the occasional glint of metal fixtures. Above them, Elena's breathing echoed in the narrow shaft. "Jesus," Jake whispered as his boots hit solid ground. "This goes deep." Maya dropped beside him, her light sweeping across what appeared to be a narrow corridor. The air carried a strange mixture of dampness and something else, something almost sterile like a hospital. Motion sensors flickered to life as they moved forward, bathing the passage in cold LED strips that revealed the true scope of what they'd discovered. The corridor stretched at least 50 feet ahead, with multiple doors branching off on both sides. Everything was pristine, as if someone had walked out yesterday and expected to return momentarily. Maya ran her fingers along the wall, feeling the seamless concrete construction that spoke of serious money and even more serious planning. "Who builds something like this?" Elena asked, finally joining them at the bottom. Her voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. "Someone who knew something we didn't," Jake replied, approaching the first door on the right. It bore a simple placard: "Communications." The door swung open with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing a room that made Maya's breath catch. Banks of radio equipment lined the walls, their displays still glowing with status lights. Multiple monitors showed weather patterns, topographical maps, and what appeared to be real-time satellite feeds of the surrounding area. A logbook lay open on the central desk, its pages covered in precise handwriting and detailed charts. Jake leaned over the logbook, squinting at the entries. "These dates go back 3 years. Last entry is..." He flipped forward several pages. 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks? Elena moved to one of the radio units, her experience as an emergency dispatcher evident in how she examined the equipment. "This is military-grade stuff. Shortwave, satellite uplinks, emergency frequencies. Whoever built this could reach anyone, anywhere." Maya found herself drawn to the monitors displaying the satellite feeds. The images showed their exact location from above, with overlays marking elevation changes, water sources, and weather patterns. But it was the additional data that made her skin crawl. Red zones marked across the map with timestamps and cryptic notations. "Look at this," she called the others over. "These markings, they're tracking something." Jake joined her at the monitor, following her finger as she traced the red zones. "They're all around populated areas. And look," He pointed to a cluster near what had to be Denver. The density increases closer to cities. A new chill settled over them as the implications began to register. This wasn't just a survival bunker, this was an observation post. Elena had moved to another door marked supplies, and her gasp brought them running. The room beyond contained enough food, water, and medical supplies to sustain a dozen people for months. Shelves lined every wall, stocked with military MREs, water purification tablets, antibiotics, and equipment Maya couldn't begin to identify. "This is insane," Elena breathed. "What was someone preparing for?" "Maybe we should be asking what they knew was coming," Jake said quietly. They moved systematically through the complex, each room revealing new layers to the mystery. A workshop contained sophisticated electronics equipment and what appeared to be custom-built monitoring devices. A library held technical manuals, survival guides, and dozens of journals filled with research notes and calculations. But it was the final room that stopped them cold. The door marked analysis opened onto a space that looked like something from a government laboratory. Charts and graphs covered every available surface, connected by colored string that created a web of connections too complex to follow. Photos of people, places, and equipment were pinned to corkboards with meticulous precision. At the center of it all sat a desk with a computer still humming quietly, its screen displaying a countdown timer that made Maya's blood freeze. 18 days, 14 hours, 23 minutes, Jake read aloud. Until what? Elena had found a stack of printed reports beside the computer. Her face went pale as she scanned the top sheet. "These are CDC bulletins, disease outbreak reports, quarantine protocols." She looked up at them with wide eyes, all dated from the last 6 months. Maya moved to examine the wall charts more closely. The patterns were becoming clearer now, tracking movements, population centers, transportation routes. This wasn't random preparation. Someone had been monitoring specific threats and building detailed response plans. "We need to figure out who built this," she said, "and we need to know what that countdown means." Jake nodded toward a door they hadn't yet explored, this one marked private. "Maybe we'll find answers in there." As Maya reached for the handle, a sound echoed down from above, the unmistakable creak of floorboards. Someone was moving around in the cabin. The metallic clang echoed through the underground chamber as Marcus's boot connected with what looked like a support beam. Sarah winced at the sound, her flashlight beam dancing across walls lined with monitors, shelving units packed with supplies, and equipment she couldn't begin to identify. "Jesus," Alex whispered, running his fingers along a workbench covered in circuit boards and half-assembled devices. "This isn't just some doomsday prepper's bunker. This is a laboratory." Sarah swept her light across the far wall, revealing a bank of screens displaying scrolling data, weather patterns, and what appeared to be topographical maps of the surrounding mountain range. Red dots pulsed at various locations across the digital landscape. "Those coordinates," she said, pointing at the nearest monitor. "They're not random. Look at the pattern." Marcus joined her, squinting at the display. Each red dot was accompanied by a timestamp and a series of numbers that meant nothing to him. But Sarah was right about the pattern. They formed a rough circle around their current location, with the cabin at the center. "Motion sensors," Alex said from across the room. He'd found another terminal, this one showing a different view. "He's got the entire valley wired. Camera feeds, seismic monitors, even what looks like audio pickup devices hidden in the trees." A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. "So he knows we're here, has known since before we reached the cabin," Marcus added grimly. "The question is why he let us find this place." Alex pulled open a drawer beneath the workbench and froze. Inside, neatly organized in foam cutouts, were photographs, dozens of them, all showing people, hikers, hunters, the occasional park ranger, moving through the forest above. Some photos were candid shots taken from a distance. Others appeared to be surveillance footage printed on photo paper. "Sarah," Alex called, his voice tight. You need to see this. She approached reluctantly, Marcus close behind. The photographs told a disturbing story. Not just random documentation of forest visitors, but detailed tracking of individuals across multiple days, sometimes weeks. Notes were scribbled on the backs in cramped handwriting. Arrival times, camping locations, behavioral observations. Marcus picked up one photo showing a family of 4 setting up camp beside a stream. The note on the back read, Day 3, subject showing signs of dehydration despite proximity to water source. Father's ankle injury worsening. Estimated departure attempt within 18 hours. He's been watching people get into trouble, Sarah realized. Studying them, but not helping them, Alex added, shuffling through more images. Look at the dates. Some of these go back 5 years. A new sound interrupted their discovery. A soft electronic chime followed by the whir of machinery coming to life. The overhead lights flickered on, revealing the full scope of the underground complex. It stretched much further than their flashlights had shown, with corridors branching off in 3 directions. Then came the voice. Welcome to Research Station 7. The speaker system carried a young male voice, calm and oddly formal. Please remain calm while I conduct a preliminary assessment. Sarah spun around, searching for cameras. She spotted them quickly. Small lenses positioned at strategic points throughout the room, their red recording lights blinking steadily. My name is Thomas, the voice continued. I've been monitoring your progress since you entered the valley 47 hours ago. Your survival metrics have been interesting. Marcus stepped forward, looking directly at the nearest camera. Where are you? What is this place? This facility serves as both shelter and laboratory for ongoing research into human survival psychology. You were selected as test subjects based on your group dynamics and individual stress responses during your initial navigation errors. Selected? Sarah's voice cracked. You mean we didn't get lost by accident? A pause. When Thomas spoke again, there was something almost apologetic in his tone. The trail markers you followed were modified, redirected. I needed subjects who would experience genuine survival stress without immediate awareness of external manipulation. Alex slammed his hand against the workbench. You sick freak! We could have died out there. Statistically improbable given the safeguards in place. However, death remains a variable in any survival scenario. It cannot be completely eliminated without compromising the authenticity of the data. The casual way he discussed their potential deaths made Sarah's stomach turn, but beneath her revulsion, her analytical mind was working. What kind of data? What are you really studying? The breaking point, Thomas replied. Every person has one. That moment when survival instinct overrides moral conditioning, when ordinary people become willing to do extraordinary things to stay alive. The question is, how long does it take? And what specific pressures trigger the transformation? The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of machinery. Sarah looked at her companions, seeing her own growing dread reflected in their faces. They weren't just lost hikers who'd stumbled upon shelter, they were rats in a maze, and somewhere above them, a brilliant young predator was preparing to see how far he could push them before they broke. The metal ladder descended farther than Marcus had expected, each rung cold against his palms as they climbed down into absolute darkness. Sarah's flashlight beam danced erratically above them, casting shifting shadows that made the circular shaft seem to breathe. The air grew warmer with each step, carrying an odd metallic scent mixed with something else, something organic and unsettling. How deep does this thing go? Elena whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Before anyone could answer, Marcus's foot touched solid ground. The surface beneath felt smooth, almost polished, nothing like the rough earth he'd expected. Sarah dropped down beside him, immediately sweeping her flashlight in wide arcs to map their surroundings. What the beam revealed made them all freeze in stunned silence. They stood in a vast underground chamber that stretched beyond the reach of their light. The walls appeared to be lined with some kind of reflective material that caught and amplified the flashlight beam, creating an unsettling shimmer. but it was the contents of the room that truly staggered them. Rows upon rows of shelving units filled the space, each one meticulously organized and labeled: food supplies, medical equipment, tools, electronics, everything arranged with obsessive precision. Digital displays mounted on posts throughout the chamber glowed with soft blue light, showing readouts for temperature, humidity, air quality, and dozens of other metrics Marcus couldn't immediately identify. "This isn't just a survival bunker," Sarah breathed, moving toward the nearest shelf. "This is like a research facility." Elena picked up a tablet from a nearby workstation. The screen flickered to life at her touch, displaying what looked like complex environmental data. "Look at this. Atmospheric readings, weather patterns, geological surveys. Someone's been monitoring everything for miles around." Marcus wandered deeper into the chamber, his amazement growing with each step. Solar batteries lined one wall, connected to an intricate power distribution system. A water purification setup occupied an entire corner, complete with multiple filtration stages and testing equipment. Near the center of the room stood something that looked like a 3D printer, but far more advanced than anything he'd seen before. "Guys," Sarah called from across the room, her voice tight with concern, "you need to see this." They gathered around her at what appeared to be a communication station. Multiple monitors displayed feeds from hidden cameras positioned throughout the forest. Marcus recognized the trail they'd hiked that morning, the stream where they stopped for water, even the clearing where they'd first spotted the cabin. "We've been watched," Elena said quietly. "The whole time we've been out here." Sarah scrolled through what looked like observation logs. Entry after entry detailed the movements of hikers, wildlife, weather patterns, years' worth of data meticulously recorded. Some entries were marked with red flags, and when Sarah clicked on one, a detailed profile appeared showing photos and behavioral analysis of a family that had passed through the area 3 summers ago. "This is beyond obsessive," Marcus muttered, scanning the entries. "Whoever built this place has been documenting everyone who comes within miles of here." A soft chime echoed through the chamber, making them all jump. One of the displays flickered, and text began scrolling across the screen in neat, precise letters. "Welcome to Laboratory 7. You have accessed restricted data. Please remain calm while security protocols are initiated." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Elena backed away from the monitor, shaking her head. "Security protocols? What kind of security protocols?" The answer came in the form of a subtle vibration through the floor, followed by the unmistakable sound of machinery engaging somewhere in the darkness beyond their sight. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the chamber, bathing everything in harsh red illumination. Subjects demonstrating elevated stress responses. Initiating behavioral study 7-7 alpha. Estimated duration 72 hours. "Subjects?" Sarah's voice cracked. "It's talking about us like we're lab rats." Marcus ran back toward the ladder they'd descended, but stopped short when he reached the shaft. A heavy steel plate had slid across the opening 30 feet above, sealing them in. The rungs were still there, but they no longer led to freedom. "The ladder," he called to the others. "It's sealed. We're trapped down here." Elena was frantically typing on the tablet she'd picked up, trying to access whatever system controlled their prison. "There has to be an override, some way to—" Her words were cut off by another chime, followed by a new message that appeared on every screen in the chamber simultaneously. "Baseline measurements complete. Beginning Phase 1, resource limitation. Food stores will be reduced by 40%. Water access restricted to survival minimums. Please adapt accordingly." Around the chamber, mechanical sounds echoed as automated systems began to execute their programming. Cabinet doors swung shut and locked. The steady hum of the water purification system changed tone, indicating reduced output. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm, her eyes wide with the growing realization of their situation. "We're not trapped hikers who found shelter. We're test subjects in someone's twisted survival experiment." The emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow as Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard. The system had locked them out after her first failed attempt, and now a countdown timer displayed prominently on the main screen. 1423, 1422, 1421. What happens when it reaches zero? Jake asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Maya didn't look up from the terminal. Best case scenario? We lose access to the bunker's systems. Worst case? This place goes into full lockdown mode, and we become permanent residents. The ventilation system had already shifted to emergency settings, recycling the same stale air with mechanical precision. Tom noticed the subtle change in pressure, the way his ears popped slightly. The genius who built this place had thought of everything, including how to keep intruders trapped. There, Maya breathed, her fingers pausing over the keyboard. I found something. The system's looking for a specific user authentication, but there's a backdoor protocol. It's asking for what it calls a legacy verification. She pulled up a series of files, scanning through them rapidly. The builder left notes scattered throughout the system. Look at this. His name was Adrian Chen, 17 years old when he started construction, finished it when he was 19. A teenager built all this? Tom gestured at the sophisticated control room surrounding them. Not just any teenager. According to these logs, he was some kind of prodigy. Full scholarship to MIT at 14, but he dropped out after his freshman year. His parents died in a car accident, left him a massive inheritance, and he disappeared. Maya's eyes widened as she read further. That was 8 years ago. He's been living here ever since. The timer continued its relentless countdown. 11:47. 11:46. Jake paced behind them, running his hands through his hair. Okay, so we know who built this place. How does that help us get out? Maya scrolled through more files, her expression growing increasingly troubled. He didn't build this just as a survival shelter. Look at these research logs. He was working on something called Project Renewal. It involves long-term sustainable living, but also... She paused, her face pale in the red light. Also something about selective preservation of human resources. Tom leaned over her shoulder, reading the technical specifications that filled the screen. His engineering background helped him pass the complex diagrams, but what he saw made his blood run cold. These aren't just survival systems, they're designed for extended isolation. Look at the psychological conditioning protocols, the behavioral modification chambers. Behavioral modification? Jake stopped pacing. What the hell does that mean? Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered and a new voice filled the room, calm, articulate, and unmistakably young. Hello. If you're hearing this message, it means you've triggered the security protocols by attempting unauthorized access to my systems. The three hikers froze, looking around the control room for cameras or speakers. Don't bother looking for me, I'm not there. This is a pre-recorded message triggered by your specific actions. Adrian Chen's voice continued with unsettling composure. By now you've discovered some information about my work here. You're probably wondering why a survival shelter needs such extensive security measures. The countdown timer shifted, now displaying 8:15, 8:14. The answer is simple. Not everyone deserves to survive. The old world operates on chance, on luck, on the random distribution of resources to people who waste them. My work here represents something better, a controlled environment where survival is earned through intelligence, adaptability, and sacrifice. Maya's hands trembled as she tried to override the message, but the system had locked her out completely. You have approximately 8 minutes to prove your worth. Hidden throughout the complex are 3 keys, one for each of you. But here's the interesting part. There are only 2 exit codes. Simple mathematics tells you what this means. Tom felt the walls closing in, both literally and figuratively. The ventilation system hummed louder, and he could swear the room felt smaller than when they'd first entered. The keys are hidden in locations that will test different aspects of your character. One requires physical courage, one demands intellectual prowess, and one calls for emotional sacrifice. Choose wisely, because the person who fails to find their key won't be leaving with the others. Jake slammed his fist against the wall. This is insane! Where is this psychopath? The beautiful truth about my system, Adrian's voice continued, as if responding to Jake's outburst, is that it reveals who people really are when survival is at stake. Will you work together, or will self-preservation override your bonds? Will you sacrifice yourself for others, or will you sacrifice others for yourself? The message ended with a soft chime, leaving them in red-tinged silence except for the mechanical breathing of the ventilation system and the digital whisper of the countdown. 6:41, 6:40, 6:39. Maya stood up slowly, her face set with grim determination. We need to split up. The hidden door swung open with a pneumatic hiss that made Sarah's skin crawl. Beyond the threshold lay a corridor carved directly into the mountain's bedrock, its walls lined with brushed steel panels that caught and reflected their flashlight beams in dizzying patterns. The air that rushed out carried the sterile scent of recycled atmosphere, and something else, something that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of a hospital morgue. Jesus Christ, Jake whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. How deep does this thing go? Marcus stepped forward first, his engineer's curiosity overriding his caution. The floor was smooth concrete, perfectly level, with LED strips embedded along the edges that flickered to life as they approached. Motion sensors, he realized. Whoever built this place had thought of everything. The structural engineering alone, he muttered, running his hand along the wall. This would have taken years, millions of dollars. Sarah followed reluctantly, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. The corridor stretched ahead into darkness, and she could hear something, a low, mechanical humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Marcus, we shouldn't be here. This is someone's private. Private what? Jake interrupted, pushing past them both. Private bunker, private mad scientist laboratory. Come on, Sarah. We're already knee-deep in crazy. Might as well see how deep the rabbit hole goes. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber that defied everything they thought they knew about the modest cabin above. The space was easily 40 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into shadows. Banks of computer monitors covered the curved walls, most dark but some flickering with data streams and satellite feeds. In the center of the room stood a massive desk setup with multiple keyboards, joysticks, and devices Marcus couldn't immediately identify. But it was the walls between the monitors that made Sarah's blood run cold. Photographs, hundreds of them. Some were clearly surveillance shots. Hikers on trails, climbers scaling rock faces, families camping in the distance. Others appeared to be taken with telephoto lenses from impossible vantage points. And scattered among them were newspaper clippings, missing person reports, search and rescue bulletins. Oh God, Sarah breathed, backing toward the corridor. Oh God, we need to leave. Now. Jake was already at the central console, his fingers dancing across one of the keyboards. Look at this, he called out, ignoring Sarah's panic. This system is connected to everything. Traffic cameras in Denver, weather stations across the Rockies, even what looks like military satellite feeds. Whoever this kid was, he was watching everything. Marcus moved to another section of the wall where topographical maps covered every surface. Red pins marked dozens of locations across the mountain range, connected by colored string like some demented spider web. Near each pin were handwritten notes in precise, cramped writing. Test Subject 7, Failed Adaptation Protocol. Recovery unnecessary. Subjects 12 and 13, Exceeded expectations. Monitor for long-term effects. Subject 19, Promising stress response. Escalate scenario parameters. Marcus, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. These aren't just random missing people. Look at the dates. He followed her pointing finger to a timeline drawn along the bottom of the largest map. The markers stretched back nearly 5 years, with detailed notations about weather patterns, seasonal hiking traffic, and optimal isolation conditions. Jake's fingers had found another keyboard, and screens around the room were coming alive with video feeds. Trail cameras, Marcus realized, dozens of them, showing real-time footage of hiking paths, campsites, and scenic overlooks across the entire mountain range. "He's been watching everyone," Jake said, his earlier excitement replaced by growing unease. "For years. Look at this database. He's got files on hundreds of people, medical histories, psychological profiles, family situations." Sarah was backing toward the exit, but her path was blocked by another bank of monitors that had flickered to life. These showed different feeds, interior cameras from what looked like underground chambers. In one, she could see a woman in hiking clothes sitting in a corner, rocking back and forth. In another, a man was frantically digging at concrete walls with his bare hands. "They're still alive," she whispered. "Some of them are still alive down here." The humming sound was getting louder, and new lights were coming on throughout the chamber. Deep in the walls, machinery was awakening. Ventilation systems, power generators, automated systems that had been dormant until their intrusion triggered some hidden protocol. Marcus was studying a schematic on one of the larger screens, a cross-section view of the entire underground complex. What they'd discovered was just the beginning. Below them, carved into the mountain's heart, were dozens of chambers, laboratories, holding areas, and something labeled simply as processing center. "We're not guests here," he said quietly, the realization hitting him like ice water. "We're the next experiment." The corridor behind them sealed with the same pneumatic hiss they'd heard coming in. The LED strips that had guided their way went dark. They were trapped in the mountain's belly with a madman's legacy, and somewhere in the darkness below, other survivors were waiting for rescue that would never come. The emergency lights bathed everything in hellish red as Maya's fingers flew across the keypad. Each beep seemed to echo like a countdown timer in their heads. Behind them, the grinding of metal against concrete grew louder. Whatever security measure had been triggered was methodically working its way toward them. 17 years ago, Maya muttered, trying another combination. What would a genius kid use as a password 17 years ago? Jake pressed his back against the wall, peering down the corridor they'd come from. The grinding had stopped, replaced by something worse. Silence. Maybe his birthday? "I don't know when he was born," Maya snapped, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool underground air. Sarah clutched the journal tighter, flipping through pages frantically. "Wait, here." He mentioned something about the day everything changed. June 15th, 2007, his parents died in a car accident. Maya's hands hesitated over the keypad. Using someone's tragedy as a password felt wrong, but survival had a way of erasing moral boundaries. She entered the date. The lights shifted from red to amber, and a new voice filled the corridor, not the automated system, but a recording. Young, maybe 15 or 16, with the careful cadence of someone who'd thought through every word. "If you're hearing this, you found my sanctuary. My name is David Chen, and if the world hasn't ended yet, it probably will soon. I built this place because I realized something most people refuse to accept. Civilization is fragile, and when it breaks fast." The heavy door at the end of the corridor hissed open, revealing another chamber beyond, but none of them moved, transfixed by the voice of the boy who'd created this underground maze. "I was 12 when I started planning this, 15 when I began construction, 17 when I finished the essential systems. My parents thought I was building an elaborate treehouse. They never knew I'd diverted part of their mining equipment to excavate beneath our family's cabin." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. He was just a kid when he built all this. "The emergency protocols you've triggered are designed to test resourcefulness under pressure," David's voice continued. "Survival isn't about having the right gear or knowing the right techniques. It's about adaptation, evolution, the willingness to become something other than what you were." Jake finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "What kind of kid talks like that?" The recording seemed to answer him. I learned early that the world doesn't care about your comfort, your plans, or your moral certainties. It only cares about results. The experiments you'll find in the next chamber represent 2 years of research into human adaptability under extreme conditions. Maya stepped toward the open door, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and dread. The chamber beyond was larger than the others, with multiple workstations arranged around the perimeter, but it was the center of the room that made her stomach lurch. Glass containers lined metal shelving units, each one labeled with dates and coordinates. But these weren't preserving food or water, they contained organic matter. Tissue samples, she realized with growing horror. Some looked fresh despite being sealed for over a decade. "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, reading the labels. "These are from people. Names, dates, locations where they were found." Jake joined them, his face pale in the amber light. "Found dead, you mean?" The recording continued as if responding to their discovery. Starvation changes human physiology in predictable ways, but some individuals show remarkable adaptations: altered metabolism, enhanced protein synthesis, modified digestive processes. I collected samples from those who didn't survive to understand what separated the adapted from the fallen. Sarah's hands shook as she read label after label. Lost hikers, missing campers, even a few that mentioned voluntary subjects, though she couldn't imagine what would drive someone to volunteer for whatever David had been studying. "The real question," David's voice pressed on, "isn't whether you can find food and water. It's whether you can become the kind of person who survives when food and water run out. The kind of person who makes the choices others won't make." Maya backed away from the shelving unit, her mind reeling. He wasn't just studying survival. He was studying how far people would go. A new sound echoed through the chamber, footsteps coming from the direction they'd entered. Slow, deliberate, definitely human. But they'd been alone in the complex, hadn't they? "The final test is simple," David's recording concluded. "Prove you understand what survival really means. Show me you're willing to evolve." The footsteps grew closer, and Jake grabbed a wrench from one of the workstations. "There's another exit," he whispered, pointing to a partially concealed doorway behind the sample storage. But as they moved toward it, Sarah realized something that made her blood freeze. The footsteps weren't just approaching, they were familiar. The rhythm, the weight, the slight drag of the left foot. Those were her own footsteps, recorded and played back with perfect precision. David Chen's survival complex wasn't just testing their resourcefulness, it was learning to become them. The generator's steady hum died with a mechanical wheeze, plunging the underground complex into absolute darkness. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the black like a desperate prayer as she swept it across the control panels, watching digital displays flicker and fade one by one. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Elena consulted the tablet, its screen now one of the few sources of light in the chamber. Emergency power kicked in, but according to this schematic, it'll only last 6 hours. After that. She didn't need to finish. They all understood what lay beyond those 6 hours, complete system failure in a sealed underground tomb. Sarah's beam found the maintenance manual Marcus had discovered earlier, its pages now feeling like their only lifeline. She flipped frantically through technical diagrams and troubleshooting guides, searching for anything that might explain the generator's sudden death. "Here," she said, stabbing at a page with her finger. "Generator shutdown protocols. It says the system has multiple fail-safes designed to protect against—" Her voice caught as she read further. "Oh God, it's not broken. It shut itself down deliberately." "What do you mean deliberately?" Marcus moved closer, peering over her shoulder at the manual. The air recycling system detected contamination in the intake vents. The generator automatically shuts down to prevent drawing poisoned air into the complex. Sarah's flashlight beam trembled as the implications hit her. Something toxic is seeping into the ventilation system. Elena's fingers flew across the tablet screen, pulling up atmospheric readings from throughout the complex. The numbers painted a terrifying picture. carbon monoxide levels rising steadily in the upper chambers, slowly working their way down toward their location. "The storm," Elena whispered. "Remember that tree we heard fall earlier? It must have damaged something above ground, maybe cracked the exhaust venting or blocked the intake filters." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, pacing in the narrow space between the control panels. "So we're trapped down here with poisoned air slowly filling the complex, and we can't restart the generator without making it worse. Perfect." But Sarah was still reading, her mind racing through the technical specifications. "Wait, there's something else. The manual mentions emergency manual override procedures for the ventilation system. If we can physically clear the contamination source and reset the intake filters, we might be able to restart everything, which means someone has to go back up," Elena said quietly. The three of them fell silent, understanding the impossible choice that lay before them. The complex's entrance tunnel would likely have the highest concentration of toxic gases. Whoever went up would be walking into a death trap, and with the storm still raging outside, they'd be fighting both poison air and the elements. "I'll go." Marcus stepped forward, but Sarah immediately shook her head. "You don't know the systems well enough. If something goes wrong up there, you won't know how to fix it." She closed the manual with grim determination. "I've been studying these schematics for hours. I understand how everything connects." "Sarah, no." Elena grabbed her arm. "There has to be another way." "Look at the readings," Sarah said, gesturing to the tablet. "We have maybe 4 hours before the contamination reaches critical levels down here. Even if we could figure out another solution, we don't have time to implement it." She began gathering supplies: flashlight, tools from the workbench, a portable air quality meter she'd found among Marcus's equipment. Each item felt heavy with the weight of what she was preparing to do. "At least let me come with you," Marcus insisted. "If we both go up and something happens, Elena's trapped down here alone with no way to operate the systems." Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she checked her flashlight batteries. "And if I don't make it back, you'll need to try the manual restart sequence. Elena can't do it alone." She pulled out a notebook and quickly sketched the restart procedure, tearing out the page and handing it to Marcus. 30 minutes after I leave, if the generator hasn't restarted, assume something went wrong and try this." Elena was staring at the atmospheric readings, watching the contamination levels creep steadily higher. The carbon monoxide is heavier than normal air. It's pooling in the lower sections first before rising. That means the main tunnel might not be as bad as we think, but the entrance itself will be a gas chamber, Sarah finished. "I know." She stood at the base of the tunnel, looking up into the darkness that led back to the surface. The beam of her flashlight seemed pathetically small against the vast unknown above. Behind her, Marcus and Elena watched in silence, their faces pale in the reflected light. "If I'm not back in an hour," Sarah said without turning around, "seal this section and try to find another way out through the emergency tunnels we haven't explored yet." Before either of them could protest, she stepped into the tunnel and began climbing toward the poisoned air above, leaving her friends behind in the failing light of the dying complex. The metal ladder descended into absolute darkness, each rung slick with condensation that made Sarah's grip uncertain. Behind her, Marcus's breathing echoed off the concrete walls like a trapped animal, while David's flashlight beam danced erratically above them, casting their shadows into writhing shapes that seemed to follow them down. "How deep does this go?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the mechanical humming that grew louder with each step. Sarah counted the rungs as they passed, 30, 40, 50 feet below the cabin's foundation. The air grew warmer and carried an antiseptic smell that reminded her of hospitals. When her boots finally touched solid ground, she found herself standing on polished concrete in what appeared to be an airlock chamber. David dropped down beside them, his flashlight revealing a heavy steel door with a circular window. Through the thick glass they could see soft blue light emanating from beyond. "This is insane," Marcus muttered, running his fingers along the seamless walls. "Who builds something like this under a hunting cabin?" Sarah approached the door's control panel, a sophisticated touchscreen that seemed decades ahead of anything she'd seen in the wilderness. As she reached for it, the screen flickered to life, displaying a simple message, "Bioscan required." A red laser swept across her face before she could react. The screen changed, "Unknown subject detected. Emergency protocols active. Please state the nature of your visit." "We're lost hikers," Sarah said, feeling foolish talking to a machine. "We took shelter in the cabin during the storm." The screen processed for several seconds, analyzing voice patterns. Stress indicators suggest truthful response. "Temporary access granted. Warning, unauthorized personnel will be monitored." The massive door hissed open with a sound like escaping pressure. Beyond lay something that defied belief, an underground complex that stretched far beyond their flashlight's reach. The ceiling arced high above them, supported by steel beams and lined with ventilation systems that hummed with quiet efficiency. Grow lights illuminated hydroponic gardens along one wall, their green leaves stark against the sterile environment. Computer workstations lined another wall, their monitors displaying scrolling data and environmental readings. "Welcome to my laboratory," a voice said from the shadows. They spun toward the sound, David's flashlight beam revealing a figure seated in a high-backed chair. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, with dark hair that fell across intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Despite his youth, something in his posture suggested he was entirely in control of the situation. "You're the one who built this?" Sarah asked, trying to mask her astonishment. "Built, designed, funded, and maintained for the past 3 years," the boy replied, standing with fluid grace. "My name is Adrian Chen, and you are Sarah Mitchell, wildlife photographer from Denver. Marcus Torres, software engineer from Austin. David Palmer, geology professor from Boulder." Marcus stepped forward aggressively. "How could you possibly know that?" Adrian gestured to a wall of monitors that had flickered to life, displaying their driver S licenses, credit records, social media profiles, and dozens of other personal details. "Your wallets contain RFID chips in your credit cards, simple enough to scan and cross-reference with available databases. I've been tracking your approach since you reached the tree line." "You've been watching us?" David's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Protecting myself," Adrian corrected. "Very few people find this place accidentally. Most who seek it out have problematic intentions." Sarah studied the boy's face, noting the premature lines around his eyes and the way he held himself, like someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "You're hiding from someone." "Several someones, actually. Corporate interests who believe my research belongs to them. Government agencies who think a 17-year-old shouldn't have access to certain technologies. Family members who prefer their geniuses safely institutionalized rather than independently operational." He moved to one of the workstations, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface that materialized above the keyboard. "The cabin serves as my public face, a simple hunting lodge that satisfies local property requirements. This facility is where the real work happens." "What kind of work?" Marcus asked, his aggression replaced by professional curiosity. Adrian smiled, and for the first time looked his actual age. "Survival technology for post-scarcity societies, closed-loop agricultural systems, quantum computing applications for resource optimization, biotechnological solutions for extreme environment adaptation." He gestured to the hydroponic gardens. "Those plants are genetically modified to grow in minimal light and produce 3 times normal nutritional density. The water recycling system achieves 97% efficiency. The air filtration removes not just toxins, but optimizes oxygen content for enhanced cognitive function." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. "You're preparing for something, an apocalypse scenario." "I'm preparing for everything," Adrian said simply. "The question is, now that you've found me, what am I supposed to do with you?" The mechanical humming seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed, and Sarah noticed that the door through which they'd entered had sealed itself shut. The silence stretched between them like a chasm as Marcus held the journal, its pages trembling in his grip. Sarah's revelation hung in the air. She had known about the boy genius, about this place before they'd ever set foot on the mountain. "You're telling me this is all coincidence?" Jake's voice cut through the tension, his eyes darting between Sarah and the complex around them. "That we just happened to stumble onto the one place you've been researching for months?" Sarah backed against the wall, her face pale in the artificial light. "I never meant for us to find it like this. The storm, getting lost, that was real. But yes, I knew there were rumors about something up here." Marcus felt the weight of betrayal settling in his chest. "What kind of rumors?" Academic circles whispered about a prodigy who disappeared from MIT when he was only 16. Elias Thorne. He'd been working on revolutionary survival technologies before he vanished without a trace 5 years ago. Sarah's words came faster now, as if confessing would somehow absolve her. There were theories he'd gone into hiding, building something extraordinary. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd heard of Elias Thorne. Everyone in engineering circles had. The kid who'd solved problems that had stumped professors twice his age, who'd published papers on sustainable living systems that read like science fiction. Jake grabbed the journal from Marcus's hands, flipping through pages with growing agitation. "So what? You dragged us up here as some kind of research expedition? Used us as pack mules for your academic treasure hunt?" "So," Sarah's voice cracked, "I suggested this hiking trip because I thought we all needed to get away. The research was just... I thought if we happened to find anything, it would be a bonus. I never imagined we'd actually discover this place, let alone needed to survive." Marcus studied her face, searching for tells he'd learned to recognize during their relationship. The slight twitch at the corner of her mouth when she wasn't being entirely truthful was absent. Despite his anger, he believed her. "Look at this," Jake said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He held the journal open to a page covered in Elias's neat handwriting. "He talks about observers, people watching his work from the outside." Marcus leaned over Jake's shoulder to read. The entry was dated 3 weeks before they'd arrived. "Motion sensors triggered again at the perimeter. 3rd time this month. Could be wildlife, but the patterns suggest human surveillance. If they're getting closer, I may need to accelerate the timeline. The fail-safes are in place, but I hope to have more time to perfect the synthesis protocols." "Synthesis protocols?" Sarah moved closer despite the tension crackling between them. "What do you think he means?" Before anyone could answer, a new sound echoed through the complex, the distinct whir of machinery starting up somewhere deeper in the facility. The 3 of them froze, listening as mechanical humming grew louder. "That's not the life support systems," Marcus said. They'd grown accustomed to the subtle background noise of air circulation and water pumps. This was different, purposeful. Jake slammed the journal shut. "We need to find him, now." They moved deeper into the complex, following corridors Marcus hadn't explored during his earlier investigation. The humming grew stronger, accompanied by a rhythmic clicking that reminded him uncomfortably of a countdown timer. The hallway opened into a vast chamber that took Marcus's breath away. Banks of servers lined the walls, their LEDs blinking in complex patterns. In the center of the room stood what could only be described as a laboratory, but unlike any Marcus had ever seen. Crystalline structures grew in sealed chambers, connected by a network of tubes carrying luminescent fluids. "Bioluminescent bacteria," Sarah whispered, her scientific training overriding their personal conflict. "He's cultivating them on an industrial scale." But it was the figure hunched over a control panel that made them all step back. Elias Thorne looked older than his 21 years, his dark hair unkempt and his clothes wrinkled from what appeared to be days without sleep. When he turned to face them, his eyes held a mixture of resignation and desperate determination. "You weren't supposed to make it this far," he said quietly. "The psychological barriers should have turned you back." Marcus felt pieces clicking into place, the nightmares, the feeling of being watched. "You've been testing us." Elias nodded slowly. "Survival isn't just about having the right resources. It's about mental resilience. about being willing to push past your breaking point when everything tells you to quit. He gestured to the laboratory around them. What I've built here could change everything. Sustainable energy, food production, medical applications that could save millions. But it requires sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Jake's hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt. Elias's smile was sad and knowing, the kind where going back to your old life stops being an option, because some knowledge comes with a price, and once you've seen what's possible, you can never unsee it. The humming intensified, and Marcus realized they were about to discover exactly what that price would be. The silence that followed Marcus's revelation pressed against them like a physical weight. Sarah stared at the coordinates glowing on the screen, her mind racing through the implications. 3 more sites, 3 more bunkers scattered across the continent, each potentially harboring survivors who had been waiting years for rescue. "We have to contact them," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of machinery. Jake stepped closer to the console, his weathered hands hovering over the controls. "How do we know they're still operational? This message could be years old." Marcus pulled up another screen, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface with practiced ease. Each site broadcasts a status beacon every 72 hours. Look, 3 pulsing dots appeared on a continental map, each marking a location hundreds of miles apart. They're all still active. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like lead. 3 communities of people, possibly families, children, all waiting in underground isolation, while the world above continued on, oblivious to their existence. She thought of her own family back home, probably filing missing person reports by now, and imagined the anguish of being trapped underground for years. "What happened to David?" she asked suddenly. "The boy who built all this?" Marcus's expression darkened. According to the logs, he left approximately 18 months ago. The system shows he inputted a final command sequence before departing. He paused, scrolling through data streams. He was only 14 when he built the primary systems here, 17 when he left. The revelation sent chills down Sarah's spine. A child had created this technological marvel, then abandoned it. Did he say where he was going? "The logs are encrypted beyond my current access level," Marcus admitted. But there are references to Protocol 7 throughout his final entries. Jake had been quietly examining another terminal, but now he turned to face them, his face pale. "You need to see this." He gestured to a screen displaying what looked like weather patterns, but the data was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Massive storm systems swirled across continents, temperature readings fluctuated wildly, and atmospheric composition charts showed alarming chemical concentrations. "This isn't current weather data," Marcus said, studying the display. "These are projections, modeling scenarios for—" He trailed off, his face growing ashen. "For what?" Sarah demanded. "Global atmospheric collapse, complete ecosystem failure. This is what David was preparing for." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Not just survival, he was planning for the end of the world. The bunker suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb. Sarah's mind reeled as she processed the information. "But the world is fine. We're not facing atmospheric collapse." "These projections are dated 5 years from now," Jake said quietly, pointing to timestamp data scrolling across the bottom of the screen. The 3 of them stood in stunned silence as the implications sank in. David hadn't just built a survival complex for temporary emergencies, he had created a refuge for an apocalypse that hadn't happened yet. And if his projections were accurate, they had stumbled into something far larger than they could have imagined. "We need to contact those other sites immediately," Sarah said, her voice steadying with resolve. "If David's predictions are even partially correct, those people need to know." Marcus nodded and began initiating communication protocols. Static filled the bunker as the system attempted to establish contact across vast distances. After several minutes, a crackling voice emerged from the speakers. "This is Haven Site Beta." "Who is this? How did you access David's network?" Sarah stepped forward. My name is Sarah Chen. We're in what we believe is the primary site. We found it by accident and discovered your location in the database. Are you all right? How many of you are there? 37 souls, came the reply. We've been waiting for contact for 8 months. David promised he would return, but the voice faded into static. Jake grabbed the microphone. This is Jake Morrison. We're going to try to reach the other sites. Can you access David's research files from your location? Negative. Our access is limited to basic survival systems and communication arrays. David kept the primary research locked at the main site. The voice paused. You need to find Protocol 7. It's the key to everything he was planning. As if responding to those words, the bunker's main screen shifted, displaying a new interface Sarah hadn't seen before. A simple prompt appeared, Protocol 7, authorization required. Marcus looked at her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Whatever David discovered, whatever he was preparing for, it's all locked behind this protocol. Sarah stared at the screen, knowing that their simple mountain hike had evolved into something that could affect the fate of hundreds of people scattered across the continent. The boy genius who had built their salvation had left them with more questions than answers, and time was running out to find the truth. The emergency protocols had initiated without warning, turning their refuge into a potential tomb. Red warning lights strobed through the complex as Maya frantically worked at the main control panel, her fingers flying across interfaces that seemed to respond with increasing reluctance. The whole system's cascading, she called out over the mechanical whirring that had begun emanating from the walls. Whatever Marcus triggered when he tried to access the communications array, it's interpreting our presence as a contamination event. Jake pressed his ear to the sealed entrance above them, hearing only the ominous grinding of multiple locking mechanisms. How long before it cycles back to normal? That's the problem. Maya's voice carried a tremor that made David's stomach clench. This isn't a normal security lockdown. Look at these readings. The air recycling system is preparing to vent everything to the outside. David joined her at the console, studying the scrolling data streams. His limited understanding of the technical displays was enough to recognize the countdown timer now visible in the corner of every screen. 12 hours, he read aloud. What happens in 12 hours? Atmospheric purge, Maya whispered. The genius who built this place designed it to eliminate any biological contamination automatically. We're the contamination. The revelation sent ice through David's veins. He thought of Marcus, still unconscious in the medical bay, his body fighting the infection that had nearly killed him. There has to be an override. Some way to convince the system we're not a threat. Maya was already several steps ahead, pulling up diagnostic screens and system architectures. The central AI is running a threat assessment protocol. It detected Marcus's deteriorating condition through the medical bay sensors and classified him as a biological hazard. When the communications array was activated without proper authorization codes, it triggered a complete facility sterilization sequence. Jake appeared beside them, having abandoned his futile attempt to force their way out. So, we need to prove we're not infected with whatever it thinks Marcus has? It's more complex than that. Maya highlighted sections of code scrolling past too quickly for the others to follow. The system is designed to be completely autonomous. Once initiated, the sterilization protocol can only be stopped by the original administrator, someone with access to the core command functions. David felt the weight of realization settling over him. The boy who built this place, who's been missing for months, Jake added grimly. Perfect. But Maya was shaking her head, her expression shifting as she dove deeper into the system's architecture. Wait. There might be another way. Look at this. There are backup protocols embedded in the medical systems. If we can prove that Marcus isn't carrying a communicable pathogen, if we can show the AI that he's responding to treatment, the system might reclassify us as non-threatening, David finished, understanding dawning. They rushed to the medical bay where Marcus lay surrounded by quietly humming equipment. His breathing had steadied since Maya's intervention, but his color remained poor and his temperature elevated. The medical monitors displayed a constant stream of data about his condition. "The infection is responding to the antibiotics," Maya observed, checking the most recent readings. "But slowly. His white cell count is still elevated, and the AI is interpreting that as evidence of an ongoing biological threat." Jake studied the complex array of medical equipment. "What if we accelerate his recovery? Push the treatment harder?" "Dangerous," Maya replied immediately. "Too much too fast could kill him." "But," she paused, studying the readouts with growing intensity, "the system isn't just monitoring his actual condition, it's running predictive models, trying to determine if whatever he's carrying could spread to the rest of us." David understood the implication. "We need to convince it that we're not infected." "Exactly. And the most effective way to do that is to provide the system with data showing that our own biometrics remain normal despite prolonged exposure to Marcus." Maya was already moving toward a cabinet filled with medical testing equipment. "We need to submit to full biological screening, blood work, respiratory analysis, everything." The irony wasn't lost on David. To save their lives, they needed to prove to a computer that they weren't dying. But as Maya began setting up the testing apparatus, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. "The timer," he said quietly. Maya looked at the nearest monitor. The countdown had accelerated, now showing less than 10 hours remaining. "The system's impatience is increasing," she realized. "It's not just running a passive assessment, it's actively trying to complete the sterilization sequence as quickly as possible." As if in response to her words, the mechanical sounds from within the walls grew louder, and the air circulation fans shifted to a higher speed. Whatever processes were building toward their destruction, they were accelerating. "Then we work faster," Jake said grimly, rolling up his sleeve for Maya's blood draw. But David couldn't shake the feeling that speed alone wouldn't be enough. The complex had been designed by someone who'd thought of everything, except how to trust the very people it was meant to protect. The silence that followed Marcus's revelation pressed down on them like the weight of the mountain itself. Sarah stared at the monitors displaying weather patterns, seismic activity, and atmospheric readings that painted a picture of a world sliding toward catastrophe. Jake stood frozen beside the fusion reactor's control panel, his hands still hovering over switches that controlled more power than most small cities possessed. "You're talking about playing God," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of machinery. Marcus's projection flickered, and for a moment his youthful face showed cracks of uncertainty. "I'm talking about survival. The asteroid impact in 6 months will trigger volcanic winter. Global temperatures will drop 15 degrees, crops will fail, governments will collapse. 80% of humanity will be dead within 2 years. And your solution is to make it worse?" Jake's voice cracked with disbelief. "Accelerate the collapse?" "My solution is to control it," Marcus countered, his image solidifying again. "Random catastrophe kills indiscriminately. Controlled catastrophe can be selective. The strong survive. The weak are eliminated quickly instead of suffering prolonged death. It's merciful." Tom had been silent through the exchange, but now he stepped closer to the central console. His fingers traced the edge of the keyboard, and Sarah noticed his hands weren't shaking anymore. "Show us the targets." "Tom." "No." Sarah grabbed his arm, but he shrugged her off. "I want to see what he's planning." Marcus hesitated for the first time since his appearance. "You're not ready for... show us." Tom's voice carried an authority Sarah had never heard before. The wall screens shifted, displaying a world map dotted with pulsing red markers. Major cities, industrial centers, military installations, hundreds of targets spread across every continent. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the nearest marker, positioned directly over their mountain. "Yellowstone is the primary target," Marcus explained, his tone becoming clinical. "A precisely placed seismic charge will destabilize the magma chamber. The resulting eruption will blanket North America in ash and trigger similar volcanic events worldwide. Secondary charges at strategic fault lines will ensure maximum impact." "You're insane," Jake breathed. Yellowstone alone would kill millions. Yellowstone will kill millions anyway when the asteroid triggers natural seismic activity. My way, we choose the timing. We choose the scope. We control the aftermath. Sarah studied the map, her analytical mind working despite her horror. The survival complexes. You built them at calculated safe distances from the blast zones. Precisely. Each facility can sustain 50 to 200 individuals for decades. Genetic diversity has been carefully considered, skills and intelligence profiles optimized. When the ash settles, the survivors will rebuild civilization according to proper principles. Whose principles? Tom asked quietly. Mine. I've eliminated the variables that led humanity to this crisis in the first place. No more nationalism, no more religious conflicts, no more resource competition. The survivors will be united under a single rational authority. Sarah felt sick. You mean under your authority? I've designed a governance system based on pure logic and scientific method. Human emotion and irrationality have been factored out. It will be perfect. Tom was still studying the console, his fingers hovering over various controls. How long until the first charges detonate? 18 hours. The sequence must begin well before the asteroid impact to ensure proper synchronization with natural geological events. Can it be stopped? Marcus's image flickered again, and Sarah caught something like sadness in his expression. The charges are already in position. Automated systems will trigger them on schedule regardless of human intervention. I learned from my parents' mistake. I didn't leave room for emotion to override necessity. Jake slammed his fist against the wall. There has to be a way. An abort code, a manual override, something. There is. Tom's voice was barely a whisper. He turned from the console, his face pale but resolute. The fusion reactor. If we overload it, the electromagnetic pulse will disrupt the automated systems, fry every circuit within a 1,000-mile radius. Marcus's projection suddenly blazed brighter, his calm demeanor cracking. That would be suicide. The reactor overload would destroy this entire mountain range. You'd die instantly. Better than living with genocide, Tom replied. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Tom, even if that works, you said it yourself. The asteroid is still coming. Maybe Marcus is right about the consequences. Maybe he is, Tom acknowledged. But that's not our choice to make for the rest of humanity. People deserve the chance to face whatever's coming on their own terms. You're choosing sentiment over logic, Marcus said, his voice rising with something approaching panic. You're choosing chaos over order, suffering over efficiency. Tom's hand moved toward the reactor controls. I'm choosing hope over certainty. Sometimes that's what being human means. The bunker's lights suddenly dimmed, and warning sirens began to wail. On the screens, red alerts cascaded across multiple monitoring systems. The charges have entered final countdown, Marcus announced, his projection beginning to fade. In 17 hours and 43 minutes, everything changes. You can die uselessly here, or you can live to see the new world. The emergency lockdown protocols had sealed them inside what Ethan called the Deep Vault, a reinforced chamber 3 levels below the main complex. Sarah pressed her palm against the cool metal door, feeling the vibrations of machinery humming somewhere beyond the walls. The red warning lights cast everything in an ominous crimson glow. How long do we wait? Marcus asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. He'd been pacing the small space for the past hour, running his hands through his hair until it stood at odd angles. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by scattered blueprints and technical manuals. His fingers moved across the pages with practiced efficiency, but Sarah noticed the slight tremor in his hands. The system should reset automatically once it determines the threat has passed, he said without looking up. But that could take anywhere from 6 to 72 hours. 72 hours? Marcus stopped pacing. We don't have that kind of time. The rescue teams will find an empty cabin and assume we moved on, Sarah finished grimly. She'd been thinking the same thing. Their planned route would have taken them past the shelter yesterday if they hadn't gotten lost. By now, the search teams would be looking miles away from their actual location. The vault contained emergency supplies, water, rations, medical equipment, but the psychological weight of confinement was already pressing down on them. The space wasn't much larger than a prison cell, with 2 narrow bunks built into the walls and barely enough room for 3 people to stand without touching. Ethan suddenly looked up from his reading, his eyes bright with discovery. "There's a manual override sequence," he said, scrambling to his feet. "It requires administrative access, but I think I can—" The lights flickered and went out completely, plunging them into absolute darkness. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in a dim blue glow from LED strips along the floor. "What was that?" Sarah whispered. Through the walls came a sound that made her blood run cold, a rhythmic thumping, like something heavy striking metal. It started soft and distant, but grew louder, more insistent. "Someone's trying to get in," Marcus said, moving toward the door. "Or something's trying to get out," Ethan corrected, his face pale in the blue light. He'd gone very still, listening intently to the sounds above them. The complex has multiple automated systems, security protocols, environmental controls, defensive measures. The thumping stopped abruptly, replaced by a different sound, the high-pitched whine of machinery powering up. Sarah felt it in her bones, a vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Defensive measures?" she asked. Ethan was already moving toward a control panel mounted on the far wall. "My father didn't just build this place to hide," he said, his fingers flying over the interface. "He built it to fight back." The screen flickered to life, displaying a schematic of the complex. Red dots pulsed throughout the upper levels, marking what looked like activation points. As they watched, more dots appeared, spreading through the facility like a contagion. "What are those?" Marcus leaned closer to the screen. "Automated defense drones," Ethan said quietly. "Dad designed them to neutralize any unauthorized intrusion. They're programmed to hunt in packs, using coordinated attack patterns." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. "But the lockdown protocols, they're supposed to keep threats out, right? Unless the system thinks we're the threat." Ethan's voice was barely audible. "The biometric scanners, the access logs. What if the security AI has been analyzing our behavior patterns? What if it's decided we don't belong here?" The implications hit her like a physical blow. They weren't hiding from some external danger. They were trapped inside a high-tech hunting ground with predators specifically designed to eliminate intruders. The whining sound grew louder, and through the ventilation system came a new noise that raised every hair on Sarah's neck. The skittering of metallic limbs moving across hard surfaces, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Marcus backed away from the door. "Tell me you can override the system." Ethan's hands were shaking as he worked the controls. "I'm trying, but the administrative access requires biometric confirmation from my father. Retinal scan, voice print, DNA sample." "DNA you might have," Sarah interrupted, grabbing his shoulder. "You're his son." "It's not that simple. The scanner needs fresh samples and the protocols—" He stopped mid-sentence, staring at the screen. One of the red dots had separated from the others and was moving steadily downward through the levels of the complex, heading directly for their location. "How long before it reaches us?" Marcus asked. Ethan checked the schematic, measuring distances. "Maybe 10 minutes." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking fast. They had limited options and even less time. But sometimes survival wasn't about having good choices. It was about making the best of terrible ones. "Show me everything you know about these drones," she said. "Every specification, every weakness. If we're going to fight our way out of here, I need to know what we're up against." The mechanical whirring grew louder as Maya's fingers flew across the control panel, her mind racing through Alex's cryptic notes. The underground complex shuddered around them, dust cascading from the ceiling as hidden machinery awakened after years of dormancy. "What did you activate?" Jake demanded, steadying himself against the wall as another tremor shook the facility. "I'm not sure," Maya admitted, her voice tight with concentration. "Alex's journal mentions something called the Phoenix Protocol, but the instructions are incomplete." Sarah pressed herself against the doorframe, watching the corridor beyond fill with an eerie blue light. Whatever it is, it's coming from deeper in the complex. That section we couldn't access before. The three of them had been trapped underground for 6 hours now, ever since the entrance had sealed itself when they'd discovered Alex Chen's true purpose. The brilliant 16-year-old hadn't just built a survival bunker, he'd created something far more ambitious and terrifying. The scattered research papers they'd found painted a picture of a boy convinced that humanity's only chance of survival lay not in preserving the old world, but in fundamentally transforming it. A new sound echoed through the chambers, a rhythmic pulsing like a massive heartbeat. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, and Maya noticed the air growing warmer. "The oxygen levels are changing," she said, checking a nearby monitor. "Whatever this protocol is doing, it's altering the entire atmosphere down here." Jake picked up another of Alex's journals, flipping through pages covered in complex equations and anatomical diagrams. "Listen to this. Day 847. The human body is inefficient, poorly adapted for true survival. But what if we could change that? What if survival wasn't about enduring harsh conditions, but about evolving beyond them?" Sarah's blood ran cold. Evolving how? Before Jake could answer, a section of the wall began to slide away, revealing a chamber they hadn't seen before. Inside, rows of cylindrical tanks lined the walls, each filled with a phosphorescent fluid that cast dancing shadows across the room. But it was what floated in those tanks that made Sarah stumble backward in horror. Bodies, or what had once been bodies. They were changed, altered in ways that defied nature. Elongated limbs, modified organs visible through translucent skin, faces that were recognizably human but fundamentally wrong. "Failed experiments," Maya whispered, reading from a tablet that had activated near the chamber entrance. Alex was trying to create a new kind of human, one that could survive in any environment. The pulsing grew stronger, and they realized it was coming from the largest tank at the chamber's center. Unlike the others, this one wasn't filled with preserved failures. It was active, its occupant moving slowly in the glowing fluid. Jake approached despite Sarah's protests, pressing his face to the glass. What he saw made his legs nearly give out. The figure inside was young, maybe 16, with features that matched the photographs they'd found scattered throughout the complex. "Alex," he breathed. "He's alive." But as they watched, they realized Alex Chen was more than alive. He was transforming. His body showed signs of the same modifications as the failed experiments, but these changes were controlled, purposeful. Gills fluttered along his neck. His fingers had elongated into something more adaptable than human hands. His eyes, when they opened and focused on the three intruders, held an intelligence that was both brilliant and utterly alien. The tank began to drain. "We need to leave," Sarah said, backing toward the exit. "Now." But Maya couldn't move, transfixed by the implications of what they were witnessing. "Don't you understand? He solved it. He actually found a way to adapt human biology for perfect survival." "At what cost?" Jake grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the tank as Alex's transformed body began to stir more actively. "Look at those other tanks, Maya. Look at what he did to himself." The complex's systems were fully active now, and new chambers were revealing themselves throughout the facility. Each contained evidence of Alex's obsession with transcending human limitations: genetic modification equipment, surgical tools designed for procedures no medical textbook would ever describe. And everywhere, journals documenting his descent from brilliant survivalist to something far more dangerous. Alex's eyes opened fully as the last of the fluid drained away. When he smiled at them through the glass, they could see that even his teeth had been modified, sharpened, strengthened, designed for a kind of life no human was meant to live. The tank's door began to open with a soft hiss. "The Phoenix Protocol," Maya realized, her voice barely a whisper. "He's not just trying to survive. He's trying to rebuild humanity in his image." As Alex Chen stepped from his transformation chamber, moving with fluid grace that was beautiful and horrifying in equal measure, the three hikers understood that their fight for survival had taken on an entirely new meaning. They weren't just trying to escape the wilderness anymore. They were trying to escape the future. The emergency lockdown alarm pierced through the underground complex like a banshee's wail, red lights strobing across the concrete walls in manic rhythm. Sarah's hands flew over the central console, her fingers trembling as she tried to decode Marcus's labyrinthine security system. The countdown timer on the main screen showed 14 minutes and 37 seconds before the complex would seal itself permanently, burying them alive beneath tons of mountain stone. "The ventilation shafts!" Jake shouted over the alarm, pointing to a schematic that had appeared on one of the smaller monitors. "There has to be another way out through the air circulation system." Elena was already moving, her survival instincts kicking into overdrive as she examined the vent grates near the ceiling. "These are too small," she called back, her voice barely audible above the klaxon. "Even if we could fit, they lead straight up through solid rock." The weight of Marcus's final revelation hung heavy in the stale air. The brilliant 17-year-old had designed this place not just as a survival bunker, but as his tomb. His journal entries, scattered across multiple screens, told the story of a boy genius who had discovered something terrible in these mountains, something that had driven him to create this elaborate prison for himself. And now they were trapped in the same nightmare that had consumed him. "There!" Sarah's voice cracked with desperate hope as she found the manual override sequence buried deep in the system files. But it requires 2 biometric scans simultaneously, and Marcus programmed it to only accept his genetic signature. The countdown showed 11 minutes. Jake's mind raced back through everything they'd discovered about Marcus. The boy had been methodical, paranoid even, but he'd also been human. Somewhere in this fortress of technology and fear, he would have left himself a way out. He had to have. "His laboratory," Jake said suddenly, remembering the sterile room they'd passed earlier. If he needed genetic samples for the biometric locks, he'd have kept them preserved somewhere climate-controlled. They sprinted through the narrow corridors, the emergency lighting casting grotesque shadows that seemed to reach for them with skeletal fingers. The laboratory door stood open, revealing walls lined with specimen containers and research equipment that looked decades ahead of anything Jake had seen in the outside world. Elena found it first, a cryogenic storage unit humming quietly in the corner, its digital display showing dozens of preserved samples. Blood, tissue, even hair follicles, she breathed, her hands already working to extract what they needed. 8 minutes remaining. Sarah had stayed behind at the console, her computer science background proving invaluable as she navigated deeper into Marcus's code. What she found there made her blood run cold. The lockdown wasn't just about keeping them in, it was about keeping something else out. Marcus's final log entry spoke of shadows that moved against the wind, of hunting parties that had searched these mountains for decades, and of a discovery he'd made that had painted a target on his back so bright it could be seen from space. Whatever he found up here, Sarah whispered to herself, someone was willing to kill for it. Jake and Elena burst back into the control room with seconds to spare, medical vials clutched in their hands. The biometric scanners required fresh samples, and Jake's hands shook as he prepared the genetic material according to Marcus's precisely documented procedures. 5 minutes. The first scanner accepted the sample with a cheerful beep that sounded obscene against the backdrop of wailing alarms. But the second scanner was positioned 20 feet away, and the system required simultaneous authentication. They'd need perfect timing and split-second coordination. "On my count," Elena shouted, taking position at the second scanner. The sample had to be applied at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right pressure, or the system would reject it and lock them out permanently. 3 minutes. Now! Both scanners erupted in brilliant green light as Marcus's genetic signature was authenticated. The central display flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, Jake thought they'd failed. Then the lockdown sequence aborted with a grinding mechanical sound that echoed through the entire complex. The exit tunnel opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a passage that angled sharply upward toward the surface. But as they gathered the crucial evidence they'd found, Marcus's research files, his warnings about what lurked in these mountains, the coordinates of what he'd discovered, Sarah made a connection that froze her to the bone. The radio transmissions they'd been intercepting weren't rescue teams. They were hunting parties, just as Marcus had warned. And they'd been tracking the three of them since the moment they'd stumbled into this hidden world beneath the mountain. The complex's exterior sensors showed heat signatures converging on their position from three directions, moving with military precision through the pre-dawn darkness. They had escaped one trap, only to discover they'd been walking into a much larger one all along. The morning sun filtered through the cabin's windows as Sarah packed the last of their supplies into her backpack. 3 days had passed since they'd discovered the complex beneath the floorboards, and the weight of what they'd learned pressed heavily on all of them. Marcus sat at the crude wooden table, carefully transcribing the final pages of the boy's journal into his own notebook, while Elena methodically photographed every piece of equipment they couldn't carry. "We can't take it all," Sarah said quietly, watching Elena work. "But we can't leave it here either. Someone else might find it." The complex had revealed its secrets gradually. The boy, Thomas Chen, according to the journal, had been 15 when he'd built this place. A runaway from a broken foster system, he'd possessed an intellect that bordered on supernatural. His survival innovations weren't just clever, they were revolutionary. Water purification systems that could work indefinitely, food preservation techniques that required no external power. Most remarkably, a communication device that could send signals through solid rock using quantum entanglement principles that shouldn't have been possible with available technology. But Thomas had vanished 2 winters ago, leaving behind only his journal and increasingly desperate final entries about the Watchers and those who would steal the future. Elena lowered her camera and met Sarah's gaze. The coordinates he wrote down, the other locations. "We have to check them." Marcus looked up from his transcribing. "Elena, we barely survived getting here. You want to go trekking to 6 more remote locations based on the paranoid writings of a kid who might have been losing his mind?" "He wasn't paranoid," Elena insisted, gesturing toward the sophisticated equipment surrounding them. "Look at what he built. This isn't the work of someone disconnected from reality. He was scared of something specific." Sarah hefted her pack, testing its weight. They decided to take the communication device and the water purification system, the 2 innovations that could save the most lives if shared with the world. But the journal had made it clear that Thomas believed powerful interests were hunting for his work, willing to kill to possess it. "The government contractors," she said, remembering the journal's later entries. Thomas wrote that they'd found his first hideout, that they'd killed his friend Jake to get the location. "Which brings us back to the question we've been avoiding," Marcus said, closing his notebook. "What do we do with this information? Who do we trust with it?" The weight of that responsibility had kept them awake for 2 nights. Thomas's innovations could revolutionize survival technology, potentially saving countless lives in disasters, conflicts, and extreme environments. But the same technology could be weaponized, controlled by those who valued profit over human welfare. Elena moved to the window, scanning the tree line with the same nervous energy she'd displayed since reading about the Watchers. He left instructions, protocols for releasing the information safely, multiple simultaneous publications, academic institutions, open-source platforms, flood the world with it before anyone can control it. "And if he was right about being hunted?" Marcus asked. "If those same people are monitoring for exactly that kind of information release?" "Then we become targets too," Sarah finished. She'd been thinking the same thing. Once they left this place, their lives would fundamentally change. They'd carry knowledge that others had killed for, and the act of sharing it could paint targets on their backs. But the alternative, keeping Thomas's work hidden, felt like a betrayal of everything he'd fought for. His journal made clear that he'd built these systems not for personal gain, but because he believed every person deserved the chance to survive, to thrive, regardless of their circumstances. "There's another option," Elena said suddenly. "We follow his plan, but we don't go home. Not immediately. We check the other coordinates first, gather everything he left behind, and then release it all at once from somewhere safe." Marcus shook his head. "Elena, we have families, jobs, lives to get back to." "Do we?" she asked, turning from the window. "If Thomas was right, the moment we surface with this information, those lives are over anyway. At least this way, we control the timing." Sarah considered this as she performed a final check of their supplies. The rational part of her mind insisted they should hike back to civilization, contact the authorities, and let others handle the complexities of Thomas's legacy. But she'd read the boy's words, seen his fears, and witnessed the extraordinary care he'd taken to protect his work. "We vote," she said finally. "All three of us. Whatever we decide, we stick together." They stood in silence for a moment, each contemplating the choice before them. Outside, the wilderness stretched endlessly, holding secrets and dangers they were only beginning to understand. Behind them, the hidden complex waited in darkness, its treasures and warnings equally compelling. "For Thomas," Elena said softly. Marcus sighed, shouldering his pack. "For Thomas?" Sarah nodded, taking one last look around the cabin that had saved their lives and changed their futures forever. "Then let's go find the truth." They stepped into the morning light, leaving the safety of the cabin behind, carrying with them the hopes and fears of a boy genius who'd trusted strangers to finish what he'd started.